He looks like your dead son. The words, sharp and cold as the December wind, sliced through the sterile air of the high-end shopping plaza. Jonathan Richardson, a man whose life was a carefully constructed fortress of wealth and routine, felt the foundations of his world crumble. Victoria, his girlfriend of 2 years, had delivered the line with the casual indifference of a weather report, her voice a jarring note in the symphony of Jonathan's carefully curated existence. She was oblivious, a beautiful, blonde vessel of blissful ignorance, unaware that she had just plunged a dagger into a wound that had been festering for 5 agonizing years. The boy, a small dark-skinned figure against the stark white of the marble entryway, sat on the cold pavement, a piece of cardboard his only shield against the biting wind. He was 10, maybe 11, the same age David, Jonathan's son, would have been. The resemblance was a cruel trick of the light, a phantom limb of a memory that ached with an intensity that stole Jonathan's breath. The same unruly curls, the same almond-shaped eyes that held a universe of unspoken thoughts, the same tilt of the head, a gesture so uniquely David's that seeing it in this stranger was like watching a ghost walk through walls. "Jonathan, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Victoria's laughter, a tinkling artificial sound, grated on his raw nerves. She adjusted the strap of her designer handbag, a casual gesture that seemed to mock the turmoil raging within him. "Come on, darling, our reservation at Lucille is for noon. We'll be late." But Jonathan was paralyzed, his feet rooted to the spot, his gaze locked on the boy. The boy, in turn, looked back, his curiosity a stark contrast to the hollow ache in Jonathan's chest. It was as if David had stepped out of the gilded frames on his mahogany desk, a living, breathing specter of what could have been. "Sir, spare some change." The boy's voice, small and raspy, pulled Jonathan from the depths of his grief. He struggled to his feet, his oversized, donated clothes swallowing his small frame. His sneakers, a patchwork of holes and frayed laces, offered little protection from the cold. Victoria, ever the pragmatist, took a step back, as if poverty were a contagious disease. "Jonathan, let's go," she hissed, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "You know we shouldn't encourage them. It only makes them lazy." But Jonathan, the architect of a multi-million-dollar restaurant empire, man who commanded boardrooms and orchestrated culinary symphonies, was rendered powerless by the gaze of a 10-year-old boy. There was something in those eyes, a flicker of intelligence, a quiet determination that mirrored the spirit of his own son. David, even in the sterile confines of a hospital room, his small body ravaged by a relentless disease, had possessed that same indomitable will, that same unwavering belief in the power of a dream. He had wanted to be a chef, just like his father, and even in his final days he had scribbled recipes in a small, leather-bound notebook, his small hands trembling with a weakness that belied the strength of his spirit. "What's your name?" Jonathan asked, his voice a hoarse whisper, ignoring the insistent tug on his arm. "Gabriel, Sir Gabriel Santos." The name, a celestial echo of hope, resonated deep within Jonathan's soul. It was a name that spoke of angels and messengers, of divine intervention and second chances. In that moment, something within him, something he had thought long dead and buried, began to stir. It wasn't just the uncanny resemblance that held him captive. It was the boy's posture, the quiet dignity with which he carried himself, a small, solitary soldier in a war against a world that had dealt him an unfair hand. David, too, had possessed that same quiet grace, that same unyielding spirit, even as cancer waged a war on his small, fragile body. Victoria, her patience wearing thin, pulled at his arm again, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his skin. "Enough of this, Jonathan. You're making a scene. We're late." But as she spoke, a small act of kindness, a fleeting moment of selfless compassion, unfolded before them, and in that moment Victoria's words, her petty concerns, her entire world of superficiality, dissolved into insignificance. Gabriel, his own plight forgotten, bent down to help an elderly man who had dropped his grocery bags, the wind scattering his papers like fallen leaves. The boy, without a word, without a hint of expectation, gathered the scattered documents, his small hands carefully smoothing out the creases, and then, with a gentle smile, he helped the man repack his groceries, his small act of kindness a beacon of light in the cold, indifferent world of the shopping plaza. Jonathan watched, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, his breath catching in his throat. He saw in that small, selfless gesture a reflection of his own son, a boy who had always put the needs of others before his own, a boy who had taught him the true meaning of compassion. Gabriel, his good deed done, returned to his spot on the pavement, his small, hopeful smile, a stark contrast to the bleakness of his circumstances, the ghost of a memory, a phantom limb of a love that had been cruelly amputated, ached in Jonathan's chest. He stood there, a statue carved from grief, his eyes fixed on the boy, a living, breathing embodiment of a past he could never escape. Victoria, her voice, a sharp, insistent drill, tried to pull him back to the present, to a world of reservations and social obligations. A world that seemed utterly meaningless in the face of this profound, earth-shattering encounter. "Jonathan, for God's sake, you're making a spectacle of yourself," she whispered, her words laced with a venomous mix of embarrassment and frustration. She glanced around, her eyes darting nervously, searching for familiar faces, for the judgmental gaze of their affluent peers. "People will think you've lost your mind." But Jonathan was deaf to her words, his mind a swirling vortex of memories. A time machine that had transported him back 5 years, to the sterile antiseptic world of a hospital room, a room that had been both a sanctuary and a prison. David, his son, his everything, had spent his final months in that room, his small body a battlefield, his laughter a fragile, precious melody that had been silenced too soon. He remembered the feel of his son's small hand in his, the weight of his small, frail body in his arms, the smell of disinfectant and fear that had permeated every corner of that room. And yet, even in the face of unimaginable pain, David had been a beacon of light, a small, flickering candle that had refused to be extinguished. He had shared his toys with the other children on the ward, his generosity a stark contrast to the selfishness of the disease that was consuming him. He had smiled at the nurses, his small, brave smile a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. And he had always asked if his father was okay. His concern for Jonathan a heartbreaking reminder of the selfless, compassionate soul that resided within his small, fragile body. "Gabriel." Jonathan repeated the name, his voice a low, reverent whisper, as if he were testing the weight of it on his tongue. "How old are you?" "10, sir. I'll be 11 in March." The words, a cruel twist of fate, a cosmic joke played at his expense, sent a fresh wave of grief crashing over him. The same age, the same birthday. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. Victoria, her patience now a distant memory, rolled her eyes, her frustration a palpable force. "Oh, for heaven's sake, now we're playing 20 questions. Jonathan, this is pathetic. The boy has probably never seen the inside of a school. You're wasting your time. Don't be so dramatic," Jonathan snapped, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He turned to face her, his eyes, once a reflection of a shared, comfortable life, now a mirror of a chasm that had opened between them. "You know exactly what I meant. These people need to learn to fend for themselves. Giving them handouts will only attract more of them." Gabriel, a silent observer in this drama of privilege and prejudice, lowered his head, his small shoulders slumped in a gesture of resigned acceptance. He had heard it all before, the same tired cliches, the same heartless pronouncements from a world that had turned its back on him. But there was no anger in his eyes, no flicker of resentment, only a profound, heartbreaking sadness, a sadness that spoke of a wisdom far beyond his years. "Where do you sleep, Gabriel?" Jonathan asked, his voice now gentle, a stark contrast to the harshness of his previous words. He had turned his back on Victoria, a silent, symbolic gesture that spoke volumes. "There's a shelter a few blocks from here, sir, but it's usually full. When there's no room, I stay here," he said, pointing to a recessed entryway, a small concrete alcove that offered a meager shield from the elements. Victoria, her arms crossed in a gesture of defiance, her foot tapping an impatient rhythm on the cold pavement, had reached the end of her rope. "There you have your sob story. Can we please go now? Our reservation was for noon. It's 1:15. Jonathan watched as Gabriel, with a meticulous, almost reverential care, gathered his meager possessions, a thin, threadbare blanket, a worn, dog-eared notebook, and a pen that looked as if it had been salvaged from a trash can. There was a quiet dignity in his movements, a sense of order in the chaos of his life, that piqued Jonathan's curiosity. "What do you write in that notebook?" he asked, his voice a gentle caress. Gabriel hesitated, his eyes darting from Jonathan's face to the worn pages of his notebook, as if he were afraid of ridicule, of a world that had taught him to keep his dreams hidden. "I write stories, sir. Things I see, things I imagine. My mother, she taught me to write before she left." His voice, a fragile thread of a sound, wavered, a small crack in the dam of his carefully constructed composure, left Jonathan's heart, a heavy leaden weight in his chest, sank even lower. "She got sick, sir. Cancer. Lung cancer. cleaned offices, but then she got too weak to work. He shrugged, a small, helpless gesture that spoke of a pain too deep for words. The hospital. They said there was nothing they could do. Not without money. She died 2 years ago. Victoria, her voice a cruel, mocking laugh, shattered the fragile intimacy of the moment. Oh, the dead mother story. They always have a sob story at the ready. Jonathan, you're being played by a 10-year-old. It's pathetic. But Jonathan wasn't listening to her. He was looking at Gabriel, at the raw, unfiltered pain in his eyes, a pain that was a mirror of his own. He knew that pain, the hollow ache of loss, the bitter taste of a world that had failed him when he needed it most. He knew what it was like, to watch someone you love slip away, to be a helpless bystander in a battle that had already been lost. Do you still write stories? He asked, his voice a gentle, soothing balm. Gabriel, his shyness a fragile shield, nodded. I write about people who help each other, about families that are happy, about children who have parents who love them. He paused, his words a poignant, heartbreaking confession, a glimpse into the world of a boy who had been forced to grow up too soon. They're just silly stories. They're not silly, Jonathan said, his voice firm, unwavering. Dreaming is the most important thing a person can do. Victoria, her patience now a distant memory, snorted in derision. Oh please. Oh, we're going to have a pop philosophy lesson on the sidewalk. Jonathan, if you don't come with me right now, I'm leaving. And you can explain to our friends why you'd rather play social worker with a street urchin. It was a line in the sand, challenge and ultimatum. And in that moment, something within Jonathan, something he had thought long dead and buried, a spark of his former self, a flicker of the man he had been before grief had hollowed him out, ignited. He looked at Victoria, at the woman he had shared his life with for 2 years, and he saw a stranger, a woman whose heart was as cold and hard as the diamonds that adorned her fingers. When had he become so blind, so deaf to the world around him? When had he allowed himself to be cocooned in a world of privilege? A world that had insulated him from the raw, unfiltered reality of human suffering. Gabriel, sensing the rising tension, the storm that was about to break, began to back away, his small, fragile body a retreat from the battlefield of their fractured relationship. I don't want to cause any trouble, sir. Thank you for talking to me. Wait, Jonathan said, his voice a gentle command. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, a small, simple gesture that was both a shield and a promise. Have you had lunch today? Gabriel, his pride a fragile, tattered flag, shook his head, his eyes downcast. Victoria, her face a mask of fury, exploded. That's it, Jonathan. I'm done. You come with me right now, or we're through. It's me or him. Jonathan looked at her, at the beautiful, empty shell of a woman who had once been his companion, and then he looked at Gabriel, at the small, resilient boy who had, in the span of a few short minutes, managed to reawaken a part of his soul that he had thought long dead. The choice, it seemed, had already been made. It wasn't about lunch, or charity, or a fleeting moment of pity. It was about the kind of man he wanted to be, the kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind. What Victoria, in her blind, self-absorbed world, couldn't possibly know was that in Gabriel's pocket, nestled beside a worn, tattered copy of The Little Prince, was a school ID card, a testament to his unwavering commitment to education, a document that bore the grades of a strata student. A boy who spent his nights in a classroom after spending his days on the streets, fighting for a future that seemed to be slipping through his fingers. She couldn't know that this small, unassuming boy, this street urchin, as she had so cruelly labeled him, was a self-taught polyglot, a boy who had devoured books salvaged from trash cans, a boy who spoke 3 languages with a fluency that would put most college students to shame. She couldn't know that the scribbles in his notebook were not just silly stories, but intricate, beautifully crafted narratives that spoke of a wisdom and a sensitivity that would have moved a literature professor to tears. But in that moment, as Jonathan's gaze, steady and unwavering, met hers, a sliver of doubt, a flicker of fear, began to creep into her carefully constructed world. She saw in his eyes not pity, not a fleeting moment of sentimental weakness, but a profound, unshakable resolve, a resolve that told her that he was about to discover something extraordinary about this boy, something that would not only change his life, but would also shatter her own shallow, self-serving world. And in that moment, she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had already lost. Jonathan's choice was as clean and final as the snap of a winter branch. He turned to Victoria, his face a mask of serene calm, a tranquility that was far more terrifying to her than any explosive rage. In that placid expression, she saw the death of their shared future, The final, irreversible severing of a bond she had mistaken for love but now understood was merely a comfortable arrangement. "Then I suppose our relationship ends right here," he said, the words simple, devoid of malice, yet they struck her with the force of a physical blow. He slid his hand into the pocket of his bespoke wool coat, retrieving a wallet made of soft, Italian leather. He didn't look at her again. His entire focus, his entire world, had contracted to the small, shivering boy standing beside him. "Gabriel," he said, his voice now imbued with a warmth that Victoria had not heard in years. "How does lunch sound? I happen to own a place just around the corner that serves the best lasagna in all of Manhattan." For a moment, Victoria was speechless, suspended in a state of pure, unadulterated disbelief. She, Victoria Vance, the woman who graced the society pages, the envy of her circle, was being publicly, unequivocally discarded for a homeless child, a dirty, nameless nobody. When the shock receded, it was replaced by a tidal wave of incandescent fury. Her carefully constructed facade of elegance and poise shattered into 1,000 pieces. "You're choosing this nothing over me," she shrieked, her voice high and shrill, drawing the attention of passers-by who slowed their pace to witness the unfolding drama. "Jonathan, you've lost your mind. When this pathetic little charity phase of yours is over and you come crawling back, don't expect me to be there." She yanked viciously at the strap of her purse, her movements jerky and violent, and "I'll make sure every single one of our friends knows what kind of man you really are. A man who prefers the company of beggars." Gabriel flinched, his small frame seeming to shrink under the assault of her venomous words. He looked down at his worn sneakers, a profound sense of shame washing over him. "Mr. Jonathan," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "I don't want to be a problem. Maybe I should just go." "Absolutely not," Jonathan replied, his voice a low, protective growl. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on Gabriel's shoulder, a shield against Victoria's vitriol. "Victoria, you can leave now. Gabriel and I have plans." She stared at them, her face a grotesque mask of hatred, before storming away, her heels clicking a furious staccato on the pavement. "I hope you're very happy together," she yelled over her shoulder, her final salvo intended for the growing audience. "When that little thief steals your wallet, remember I tried to warn you." An uncomfortable silence descended in her wake. The weight of the ugly scene hung heavy in the air. Jonathan felt a strange and unexpected sense of liberation, as if he had just shed a heavy, suffocating skin. He had been living in a gilded cage, and he hadn't even realized it until this small, forgotten boy had inadvertently handed him the key. He looked down at Gabriel, whose eyes were still fixed on the ground. "I am so sorry, Gabriel. No one has the right to speak to you that way." "It's okay, sir," the boy mumbled, shrugging with a weary maturity that broke Jonathan's heart. "She's not the first person to think things like that about me. I'm used to it." Jonathan's restaurant, Rickety, which meant memories in Italian, was a quiet oasis of old-world charm nestled between two gleaming modern storefronts. It was a tribute to his late wife Elena, whose family recipes formed the heart of the menu. Inside, the air was warm, scented with garlic, rosemary, and slow-simmered tomatoes. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, and the lighting was dim and intimate. As they stepped inside, a wave of warmth enveloped them, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the street. Gabriel stopped just inside the door, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. He took in the crisp white tablecloths, the sparkling crystal, the hushed conversations of the well-dressed patrons. He felt as though he had stepped into another dimension, a world he had only ever glimpsed through Rain Street windows. He was acutely aware of his dirty clothes, his scuffed sneakers, the fact that he probably smelled of the street. He instinctively tried to make himself smaller, to fade into the woodwork. The Motta D, a tall, impeccably dressed man named Arthur who had been with Jonathan for over a decade, approached them. His professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he took in Gabriel's appearance, but he recovered instantly, his gaze shifting to Jonathan. "Mr. Richardson, good afternoon. Your usual table." "Yes, Arthur. And please, bring a warm apple cider for my young friend here while we look at the menus." Jonathan gently guided Gabriel through the dining room, ignoring the curious and, in some cases, disapproving glances from the other diners. He felt a surge of defiant pride. Let them stare. Seated at a quiet corner table, Gabriel studied the heavy, leather-bound menu with an intensity Jonathan had only ever seen in scholars. His small finger traced the elegant script, his lips moving silently. Jonathan watched him, fascinated. The boy wasn't just looking at the food, he was reading every word, absorbing every detail. Jonathan realized with a jolt that Gabriel was looking at the prices, mentally calculating, searching for the cheapest item on the menu. "Gabriel," Jonathan said gently, leaning forward, "I want you to order whatever your heart desires. Don't look at the numbers, they don't matter today." The boy looked up, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "How did you know?" Jonathan offered a small, sad smile. "Because that's what I would have done in your place. My father used to say that true generosity isn't about the price of the gift, but the value it holds for the person receiving it. Today, the value is in you feeling completely welcome." Gabriel finally looked at him, a flicker of trust in his dark, intelligent eyes. He closed the menu and said softly, "I've always dreamed of trying lasagna. My mother used to read about it in books and tell me what it must taste like." While they waited for their food, Jonathan found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone, not even Victoria, in years. He learned that Gabriel's mother, Maria, had been a voracious reader who had instilled in her son a deep and abiding love for the written word. She had worked 2 cleaning jobs, saving every spare dollar to buy him second-hand books. He spoke of her with a quiet reverence, her memory a sacred space in his heart. "She always said that our bodies might be stuck in one place, but our minds could travel the world through books," Gabriel explained, his gaze distant. "She sounds like an incredible woman," Jonathan said, his own heart aching with a familiar sorrow. When the food arrived, steaming and fragrant, Gabriel stared at the plate of lasagna, as if it were a priceless work of art. He picked up his fork with a delicacy that seemed out of place given his hunger, and took his first bite. He closed his eyes and a slow beatific smile spread across his face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated joy, and in that moment, Jonathan felt a profound sense of rightness, a feeling that had been absent from his life for 5 long years. He was not just feeding a hungry child, he was feeding a hungry soul. After a few more bites, Gabriel seemed to remember the notebook resting on the chair beside him. He looked at it, then back at Jonathan, a silent question in his eyes. "Your stories," Jonathan prompted gently. "You said you write them down." Hesitantly, Gabriel retrieved the worn notebook and passed it across the table. Jonathan opened it with a sense of reverence. The pages were filled with a neat, precise cursive. But these were not the simple, childish tales he had expected. He saw pages of poetry, filled with startlingly mature imagery about loneliness and hope. He saw detailed character sketches of the people Gabriel observed on the street, each one imbued with a deep sense of humanity. And then he saw a story, titled The Architect of Flavors, about a sad king who had forgotten how to taste joy until a poor kitchen boy reminded him of the simple pleasure of a perfectly baked loaf of bread. Jonathan's breath caught it. His throat. It was a powerful, beautifully written allegory about grief and healing. He looked up at Gabriel, his eyes shining with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Gabriel, this is extraordinary. Your mother taught you to write like this." "She taught me the words," Gabriel said shyly. "The stories, they just come." Jonathan continued to turn the pages, and then he saw it. Tucked into the back of the notebook was a folded, yellowed report card from a public night school. Gabriel's name was at the top, and next to it, a string of perfect A's, mathematics, history, English literature, and a 4th subject that made Jonathan stop cold. "French. You're taking French?" Jonathan asked, trying to keep the surprise out of his voice. Gabriel nodded. "I started teaching myself with some old textbooks I found. The teacher at night school, she helps me with my pronunciation when she has time. On the restaurant menu, the desserts were listed with their French names." Jonathan pointed to one. "Can you read this for me?" Gabriel looked at the menu. "Crème brûlée," he said, his pronunciation flawless. He then looked at another. "Mousseux." He looked back at Jonathan. "My mother. Her grandmother was from Paris. She always wanted to take me there." Jonathan felt a thrill, a sense of discovery that was more exciting than any multi-million-dollar business deal. He leaned back in his chair, a daring idea beginning to form in his mind. He looked at this brilliant, resilient, extraordinary child. Sitting across from him, a boy who had every reason to be bitter and broken, but was instead filled with grace and intellect. He thought of the empty rooms in his vast, silent penthouse. He thought of the David Richardson Foundation, the charity he had established in his son's name, which had until now been a well-funded but soulless enterprise, run by accountants and lawyers. He was looking at a prodigy, a diamond buried in the grime of the city. To simply give him a meal and send him back to the street would be more than a failure. It would be a sin. "Gabriel," Jonathan began, his voice serious, "what you have, your mind, your talent, it's a rare gift. It deserves to be nurtured. It deserves a chance." Gabriel looked at him, his large dark eyes filled with a cautious hope. What do you mean, sir? I mean that a life on the street is over for you. Starting tonight. Jonathan took out his phone. I'm going to make a few calls. We're going to find you a safe place to sleep. And tomorrow we are going to find someone who can properly assess your abilities. A professor, a specialist, someone who can see what I see. For the first time that day, Gabriel's composure crumbled. His eyes filled with tears, which he tried desperately to blink away. But why, he stammered. Why would you do all this for me? Jonathan reached across the table and placed his hand over Gabriel's. Because 5 years ago, I lost a son who was smart and kind, and who dreamed of making the world a more beautiful place, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And today, I think I just found another one. As Jonathan made his calls, marshalling the immense resources at his command, a different kind of conversation was taking place across town. In the dim, smoky interior of an exclusive cocktail lounge, Victoria Vance was holding court. Surrounded by a coterie of equally wealthy and callous friends, she was spinning her own narrative, transforming her humiliation into a cautionary tale. He's completely lost it, she said, swirling the olive in her martini. I mean, utterly and completely insane. He threw me over me. For some grimy little street kid who was probably running a scam. She took a dramatic sip. He said the kid looked like David. Can you imagine? It's morbid. He's clearly having some sort of breakdown, and this little con artist is taking him for everything he's worth. Her friends murmured in sympathy, their faces a mixture of feigned concern and delicious schadenfreude. They thrived on drama, and Victoria was serving it on a silver platter. You have to be careful, darling, said a woman named Amanda, her face a taut mask of plastic surgery. These people are like cockroaches. You let one in, and soon you have an infestation. Victoria leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I'm telling you, the boy is a professional. He had this whole sob story about a dead mother, a love of books. It was pathetic. Jonathan just ate it up. He's so vulnerable right now. She paused for effect. Someone needs to warn people about what's happening. Someone needs to expose this child for the manipulative little parasite he is. As she spoke, a young man at the end of the bar, a junior associate at a rival firm who had been listening intently, discreetly angled his phone. He pressed record. In the digital age, words had a permanence, an echo that could travel far beyond the confines of a private lounge, and Victoria, in her bitter quest for revenge, had just lit a match, completely oblivious to the fact that she was standing in a room full of gasoline. The storm she was brewing was not for Gabriel, but for herself. 3 days later, Victoria Vance woke up to a world on fire. Her world. The video, shot on a grainy cell phone in the dim light of the cocktail lounge, had become a viral sensation. It was everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the morning news. A hashtag elite racism, was trending globally. Her words, stripped of the context of her sycophantic audience, were laid bare for the world to see, a raw, ugly testament to a heart filled with prejudice. These people are like cockroaches, a manipulative little parasite. No, we shouldn't encourage them. I hope you're very happy together. When that little thief steals your wallet, remember I tried to warn you. Her own voice, dripping with venom and disdain, was a horrifying soundtrack to her public execution. The backlash was swift and merciless. Her phone, which had been buzzing with sympathetic texts from her friends just days before, was now a relentless torrent of hate mail and death threats. The first call was from her boss at the luxury advertising agency where she was a senior account executive. His voice was cold, devoid of any of the usual pleasantries. Victoria, I'm sure you've seen the video. Our clients are in an uproar. We're a company that prides itself on inclusivity and diversity. We can't have someone who espouses those kinds of views representing our brand. You're fired. Effective immediately. The second call was from Amanda, her so-called best friend, the queen bee of their social circle. Her voice was a mixture of panic and self-preservation. Vic, I'm so sorry, but you can't come to the charity gala on Saturday. The board is furious. You've brought a scandal to our doorstep. We can't be associated with you right now. One by one, the pillars of her carefully constructed life crumbled. The exclusive clubs she frequented suspended her membership. The high-end boutiques where she had spent a small fortune on designer clothes sent her polite but firm emails, asking her to refrain from shopping in their stores. Even her roommates, two equally ambitious and image-conscious young women, left a note on her bedroom door, informing her that they were breaking the lease, and that she had 30 days to find a new place to live. While Victoria's world imploded, Gabriel's was expanding in ways he had never dared to imagine. Jonathan, true to his word, had arranged for him to meet with Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned linguistics professor at Columbia University. Dr. Chen, a woman who had spent her life studying the intricacies of language, was, to put it mildly, astounded. In all my years of teaching, she told Jonathan after a 2-hour private session with Gabriel, I have never encountered a mind like his. His grasp of syntax, his intuitive understanding of grammar, his ability to absorb and retain vocabulary. It's not just impressive, it's a once-in-a-generation talent. He's not just a student, he's a prodigy. Gabriel, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the professor's book-lined office, blushed at the praise. He had spent the morning taking a series of language proficiency tests that he had not only passed, but had aced, scoring in the 99th percentile in both French and Spanish. Our university has a program for gifted and talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds, Dr. Chen continued, her eyes sparkling with excitement. It's a highly competitive program, but I have no doubt that Gabriel would be a shoo-in. A full scholarship, room and board, a living stipend, everything he needs to thrive. Jonathan looked at Gabriel, at the hope that was dawning in his eyes, a light that seemed to chase away the shadows of his past. Are you sure this is what you want? He asked, his voice gentle. Gabriel, his voice filled with a quiet, unshakable certainty, nodded. Mr. Jonathan, he said, his gaze steady and unwavering, for the first time in my life, I'm sure of something. It was in that moment, as Gabriel clutched the acceptance letter that would change the course of his life, that Jonathan's phone rang. It was Victoria. Her voice, once so confident and commanding, was now a thin, reedy whisper, a fragile thread of a sound that was barely audible over the static of a bad connection. Jonathan, please, you have to help me, she pleaded, her words a torrent of desperation. My life is over. I've lost everything, that video. It's everywhere. I didn't mean those things. I was just angry. You know me. Jonathan, his heart a cold, hard stone in his chest, looked at Gabriel, who was tracing the elegant script of the Columbia University letterhead with a sense of wonder and disbelief. No, Victoria, he said, his voice calm, measured, and utterly devoid of pity. I don't know you. I thought I did, but I was wrong. The woman in that video, the woman who said those hateful, ugly things, that's the real you. But, you don't understand, she sobbed. I'm being threatened. I'm afraid to leave my apartment. Please, just tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I'm not a racist. Jonathan looked at Gabriel, at the boy who had, in the span of a few short days, managed to reawaken a part of his soul that he had thought long dead. He thought of the quiet dignity with which Gabriel had endured Victoria's insults, the resilience with which he had faced a world that had dealt him an unfair hand. 3 days ago, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, you called this boy a parasite. You said he was worthless. Today he was offered a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious universities in the world. Who do you think was right, Victoria? The silence on the other end of the line was a deafening admission of guilt. Your consequences are not my fault, Jonathan continued, his voice now a cold, hard blade. They are the direct result of your own words, your own choices. You've built a world based on prejudice and exclusion, and now that world has turned on you. For the first time in a very long time, I believe that justice has been served. He ended the call, the silence in the professor's office a stark contrast to the storm that was raging within him. Gabriel, his eyes filled with a quiet, knowing sadness, looked at him. She asked for your help, didn't she? Jonathan nodded. She did. But there's a difference between you and her, Gabriel. When you needed help, it was because the world had been unkind to you. When she needs help, it's because she has been unkind to the world. That afternoon, as Gabriel wandered through the hallowed halls of the Columbia University Library, his eyes wide with a sense of wonder and belonging, Victoria sat alone, in her now empty apartment, the silence a deafening roar in her ears. She scrolled through the endless stream of comments on the viral video, each one a dagger in her heart. She had lost everything, not because of a 10-year-old boy, but because of the ugliness that resided within her own soul. But there was one final, devastating revelation to come, a twist of fate so profound, so cosmically orchestrated, that it would forever alter the course of both Jonathan's and Gabriel's lives. That morning, while Gabriel had been taking his proficiency tests, Jonathan had made a call to the David Richardson Foundation, the charity he had established in his son's name. He had asked his lawyers to begin the process of setting up a new scholarship, the Gabriel Santos Scholarship for Gifted and Talented Youth, In order to do so, he needed Gabriel's birth certificate, a document that the boy, in his transient life, had never seen. A few hours of legal wrangling, a few calls to the city's records department, and the document was in his hands. And that's when he saw it. The date of birth, March 15th, the same as David's. The place of birth, St. Jude's Hospital. The same as David's. The time of birth, 3:15 a.m., 15 minutes after David had been born, in the room next door. The universe, it seemed, had a strange and mysterious way of balancing the scales, of mending broken hearts, of bringing together souls who had been destined to find each other in the vast, chaotic expanse of the city. 6 months later, Gabriel Santos stood on the stage of the university's grand auditorium, a confident, articulate young man who bore little resemblance to the small, shivering boy Jonathan had met in the parking lot of a high-end shopping plaza, who was accepting the award for Freshman of the Year, his academic achievements having already become the stuff of legend on campus. Jonathan sat in the front row, his eyes filled with a pride that was so profound, so all-encompassing that it felt as if his heart would burst. He had told Gabriel about the coincidence of their births, about the strange, inexplicable connection that seemed to bind them together. Gabriel, in his quiet, wise way, had simply smiled and said, "I think David sent me to you, Mr. Jonathan. I think he knew you needed someone to love." During his acceptance speech, Gabriel, his voice clear and strong, spoke of his journey, of the challenges he had overcome, of the people who had believed in him when no one else would. And then, to the surprise of everyone in the auditorium, he mentioned Victoria by name. "I am even grateful to those who doubted me," he said, his gaze steady and unwavering, "to those who saw me not as a person, but as a stereotype. For they taught me a valuable lesson, that the best response to prejudice is not anger, but success. The best way to silence the voices of hate is to build a life so full of love and achievement that their words become nothing more than a distant, meaningless echo." Victoria, from the cramped one-room apartment she now called home, watched the speech on a live stream, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask of regret. She had lost everything, not because of a viral video, but because she had failed to see the humanity in a small, forgotten boy. She had chosen prejudice over compassion, and in doing so, she had sentenced herself to a life of loneliness and obscurity. The true justice, Jonathan realized as he watched Gabriel receive a standing ovation, was not in Victoria's downfall, but in Gabriel's rise. It was in the transformation of a boy who had been invisible into a young man who was now a beacon of hope for a world that was so often shrouded in darkness. It was in the healing of a father's broken heart, in the creation of a new family, a family forged not by blood, but by a love that was as powerful and as enduring as the stars in the sky. Sometimes the universe puts people in our path not by chance, but by design. Sometimes it sends us the very person we need to heal our wounds, to mend our broken hearts, to remind us that even in the darkest of times, there is always a glimmer of hope, a flicker of light, a reason to believe in the extraordinary power of the human spirit. And sometimes, just sometimes, it sends us an angel named Gabriel,